Welcome to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata and I'm dreaming up the books. Today, as promised, I'm going to be doing another reading of an excerpt from one of my books. This time it is Tales from the Age of Unity. This is a collection of short stories that are based on the world of Ganges, only it occurs before the Crucible Spirals trilogy. So it's kind of a prequel. A lot of Easter eggs here for people who love the trilogy, and for those who haven't delved into my science fiction, it's not a bad place to start, although you will not get it. You want to reread it after reading the trilogy. That's what I'm saying. So be prepared to reread this one. Just so that you all know, at the back of all of my science fiction books is a glossary where I describe terms that are only used in Ganges. So if there's language there, you're like, what do they mean by, I got a weight of rotation? It's in there. It's in there. What is a pairing slice? That's in there. So it's all covered. I got a nice glossary in the back of each of my science fiction books, and I do update them from book to book. So as new terms come out and as the culture continues to change, I add in new words into the glossary so there's no confusion. In the glossary are also words that we use today, here and now, that might be considered rare. And I include those as well. Things that you may not know, certain terms that, if you're not really into Googling things as you read, I've got a few of those in there too. So no worries on that. And you can thank my beta readers for that. They insisted. Okay, we are now reading an excerpt of the short story called Humanitarian Aid in Tales from the Age of Unity. It's about halfway through the book. These are all, there's two novellas, one in the beginning, one at the end of the book, and then the rest are short stories. So here we go. I hope you enjoy. Wheel rotation, spin sewing, ship harvest, spiral 2342. Stellar sector, spine tubeway. Lorenzo Bettner was watching the injured woman's progress with his heart threatening to burst from his chest. He stood in front of a maintenance hatch, keeping the door open with his presence and waving her on frantically. Her face was bruised and battered. Her hair was wild and stiff with blood. She stumbled briefly and he shouted, "Come on! You can do it! Don't look back!" The woman gave a strangled cry of terror and continued to stumble her way toward him. A few meters behind her were dozens of shouting crew, all of them waving their fists in the air, some throwing small objects at her back. The data pad bounced off her head and she whimpered as she ran for her life. He could hear Naga remonstrating the crew for their violent behavior, but no one was listening to the AI. While Lorenzo knew that stellar officers were being contacted to stop the carnage, he knew they would be too late to have any effect. Every pollen sliver counted right now, or more lives would be lost to the rampaging crew venting their hatred upon those they saw as a threat to their way of life. Sounds familiar. Like so many he had led to midships, the woman was part of a group who were protesting the holy mission, questioning the Octary's long task of Ganges. They called themselves the Galactic Ecological Movement, GEM for short. Mostly they were made up of philosophers, dreamers, and crew who had a tendency to think for themselves. They came from all the sectors and were of a wide variety of ranks. Their arguments and protests had been peaceful enough, but the subject matter they chose to target with their debates was anathema to everything the rest of the crew stood for. Gem had become a highly vocal minority who clogged the wall screen broadcast with a message that the majority of those who served Ganges found reprehensible. Unlike the woman he was aiding, Lorenzo was not a member of this odd movement, but he hated to see them being punished for their opinions. They were useful crew, despite their tendency to argue over something that was settled generations ago. He was not going to stand by and simply watch them get killed over it. Naga had been helping him all rotation, gathering the members of GEM into the main spine tubeway. The AI had questioned his plan to aid them, but he had told Naga to trust in his intuition. The crowd behind the woman was gaining ground as she slammed into him, gasping for breath. Lorenzo pulled her back, and the hatch slammed shut behind her. He looked at the nearest Naga unit attached to the side wall of the maintenance corridor they were in and shouted, "Now, Naga, please! Emergency lock of this hatch!" The portal buzzed loudly, and the display screen that controlled the door went dark as Naga cut the power feed. The woman was weeping into his chest, the sound of many fists banging on the shut door. Lorenzo looked down at the bedraggled woman. "We don't have time to rest. You must follow me to safety, or all is lost." She looked up at him, with her face half swollen and covered in blood. "Where can we go? They will find us. They'll never stop." Lorenzo tried to smile, but it came out more as a grimace. "I have a plan. It's a strange, but that will be in its favor. Trust me, they won't know how to find you once we are done this rotation." Her look of confusion bit into his soul, but he pulled his shoulders back and grabbed her uninjured arm, then led her down the maintenance tunnel. This whole situation had begun with the ostracism coming from many high-ranking officers of several sectors. This had spread to vendors, chip-based services, and rank selection. No crew member who was known to be part of the galactic ecological movement would ever gain any traction at their post, were publicly ignored, and found their chips were meaningless as a tool for barter. It was as though the Judiciary Council had found them all as being not crew, despite the fact that no hearings had ever been heard by the courts concerning the members of GEM. It was the crew who had taken on such a judgment by themselves, which was against the Prime Charter. One of the officers involved in this injury to justice was Pavel Sidana, who, like Lorenzo, was a member of the great families at Forward Estates within Residence Wheel 1. Pavel had ranted and raved about the danger of allowing frequent protests by the galactic ecological movement to continue unabated. He had been riling up the rest of the crew to take matters into their own hands, all for the sake of the holy mission. Just as Lorenzo's family, the Bettners, had political influence within several sectors, Pavel also had this advantage, and his list of sycophants and supporters grew every sowing. This rotation, the crew had been roused to a fever pitch, then struck out against those who said the holy mission should end. Pavel had been quite the dramatic demagogue this rush slice. His broadcasts have been placed in every commuter tram, personnel lift, and major public wall screen through his connections with the media companies that brought news and entertainment programs to the crew. Naga had made an attempt to intervene, but it could not interfere with strictly human endeavors. The crew had refused to listen to the AI's reason and logic. They hadn't wanted to hear about compassion and rights. They had come to see the members of GEM as a stain on the honor of the crew, and they wanted it removed. Lorenzo and the woman he had rescued met up with a handful of other GEM refugees further down the maintenance corridor, and they locked each hatch they came to, disabling the doors with Naga's assistance. Every cross passage was furtively checked with fearful eyes, looking out for more raving crew. Lorenzo was the only one who hadn't been roughed up. His blue and green stellar uniform was still pristine, which made him stand out from the rest of the group. They all looked to him for guidance, so he took the lead, as was his habit. He was a Bettner of the great families. He was a commander in his sector, and thus was used to being obeyed without question. He gave the ones in the back instructions on how to lock all the doors behind the ragged group, as he led them on toward the spine of Ganges. Lorenzo understood far better than his charges how tight the timing had to be if anyone was going to get out of this situation alive. He had to admit that his distant cousin, Pavel, had done an incredible job of riling up the crew. Their response to Officer Sedana's diatribes had surprised him deeply, The only other time he had heard of such an outpouring of hatred was during his lessons about the awakening from his father. The mute, yeah, excuse me, my phone is going off here. The officer mutiny at Planet 3 had been brutal and bloody, with the crew siding with Naga and the Holy Mission. Since then, peace had reigned during what was being called the Age of Unity. It seemed that the pacifistic nature of the crew was a well-hidden lie, something every officer should keep in mind. This time, the trouble wasn't coming from an attempted mutiny, but as a response to a set of secular beliefs, which had become more strident lately. The members of GEM didn't want to take over the ship. They just wanted to discuss and openly argue against the holy mission to terraform planets as being a form of human-based pollution within the galaxy's normal ecology. To Lorenzo, the argument was ridiculous, for no other life forms, save upon one world, had been discovered after numerous terraforming missions. Even that singular example of non-terrestrial life had not been sentient, and Ganges had left that world alone, albeit after a long series of debates. Most of the galaxy was empty, barren, despite having multiple planets within the correct orbit to foster its existence. No one knew why there were so many lifeless worlds, but it was an indisputable fact. One of the GEM members around him hesitated in front of the final door through which they would have to pass. "Where are you taking us? How is going deeper into midships going to help? Are you leading us into a trap of some kind?" Lorenzo looked down at the balding man who had just questioned him. "I am risking my own life, not to mention my post and reputation, for your sake. There are things you don't know about Ganges, or you would have solved the riddle of where I'm leading you already. The biggest problem is that there are so many of you to rescue. If you were a smaller group, you'd be safe right now. As it stands, there are hundreds of others we must meet with. Only then can I lead you all to safety. I won't do this piecemeal. That way would spell disaster for us all. It must be done in one swift stroke, or everything will fall, and your people will die. I fear there are other members of your organization still within the habitable portions of Ganges, those who have yet to be discovered by the rest of the crew. Once you establish yourselves, it'll be up to you to contact them and bring them home." And that is where I am ending this little excerpt from Tales of the Age of Unity. Humanitarian Aid is the name of the story. Uh, and it seems that someone really, really, really wants to talk with me. So I'm going to end this here and now. Yes, this is almost like a live feed, but it's not a live feed. I don't know. I like pre-recording it anyway, but also having people say, yeah, things are going on here. Because things are. Things are going on here like crazy. Once I'm done with my excerpts from my books, and there are two more to go. Next week, I'm going to be doing Favored Son, which is something to look forward to, and then finishing off with Stellar Trespassers. And that'll be excerpts from all 7 books that I've written and published. I hope you have enjoyed this one. Please subscribe. It really does help me out tremendously. And I love knowing that people are watching this. So have yourselves a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.